Hey everyone, I'm Roberto Hernandez, tech enthusiast, podcaster, and musician. Welcome to the very first video for the North Coast Water Association's YouTube channel. Today I had the privilege of speaking with Val King, a leading expert in irrigation security, an agriculture tech advocate, vineyard specialist, and founder of North Coast Water Association. In this conversation, we dive into the world of irrigation security and explore how modern farms and vineyards are adapting to challenges in labor, water management, and climate. Val brings decades of hands-on experience and shares invaluable insights about the intersection of traditional agricultural practices and technologies. Whether you're a vineyard operator, an ag professional, or someone curious about the future of sustainable agriculture, you're about to discover how innovative irrigation practices can reshape the industry. Val also explains the technology imperatives that will impact the future of agriculture. And now, here's me speaking with Val King. Hey Val, thanks for joining me, and welcome to the two of us to the new North Coast Water Association YouTube channel.
Great to be here, Roberto. Thank you, and thank you for your efforts putting this together.
Absolutely. I look forward to doing more of them. And since will be one of the first times I've done video and audio, to keep the editing low, let me talk a little bit about you for listeners. So for those of you listening, Val brings over 2 decades of hands-on experience in agricultural technology and irrigation systems, offering unique insights into the future of sustainable farming. And as the founder of North Coast Water Association, he specializes in helping growers navigate the critical challenges of labor, water, and climate change through practical technology solutions. Areas of expertise include irrigation security and climate resilience, vineyard technology implementation and maintenance, labor force development and modern agriculture, groundwater compliance and pump efficiency, and much, much more. And as we go along, Val, if I left anything super critical out, you feel free to plug it in.
Sounds good, thanks.
Well, let's start off with a question that has been intriguing to me since we started working together, and I know it's a big deal for ag in general, but for listeners, could you explain or give us your take on the concept of irrigation security?
Yeah, great question. Irrigation security is at its simplest is, how secure is my irrigation source? How secure is my irrigation, my ability to deploy water? These are all impacted by labor, of course, the availability of water, whether I have water or not, whether my pumping systems are working correctly, and increasingly climate change. We have situations up here in the North Coast where we might see over 100 degrees for a week at a time. A lot of the varieties that we grow and the systems, certainly the systems that we've engineered, were not necessarily designed to be able to apply water in response to those kind of heat extremes. So irrigation security is, again, labor, water, climate. What are the vulnerabilities that might exist in a given operation, given system that might affect that?
And speaking of labor, water, climate, and irrigation security, how does this all relate to the boots on the ground concept that we've been talking about?
So that's an important question about the boots on the ground, is that agriculture obviously is a labor-intensive operation, labor-intensive industry. And as more technology flows into the vineyard, whether it's soil moisture sensors, pump control, valve control, weather stations, those type of things, there's a certain burden with that goes along with that technology, and there's a boots on the ground that's going to be needed to configure and repair all those different things. So your ability to handle and manage these technologies will be part of that irrigation security question.
What about like when we get in the area of site assessment and data, what data points are most crucial when assessing a site's irrigation security?
So when I do a site assessment, when I do a site walk, the 2 things that I'm looking for first are, number 1, is there a recent pump test? Is there documentation on the pump and the system? The other critical thing is, what is the tribal practices, tribal knowledge that's going on in the operation of the system? Is the system being operated today the way it was intended a year ago or 10 years ago? of that tribal operations, of that tribal knowledge, how much of that is actually understood by management and is repeatable?
Well, and speaking of tribal knowledge, if I can jump around, what does ag need to do about, older folks with tribal knowledge that are retiring and something that you've pointed out to me and is common in other spaces where we just don't have a lot of young people coming in?
Well, I think part of it is the capture of that data, the capture of that knowledge before those employees leave. And again, technology helps that, process helps that. And that knowledge and that data has to be shared with the younger people coming into the organization. It has to be documented in a way that you can count on it for to execute against your agronomic intent.
Okay. And I guess maybe something that is relevant to that, we've talked about women in the space, and I guess, I'd love to hear your thoughts on why that growing demographic of like these tech savvy young women coming into the ag space is important to your mission and to that, and should be to that of farm operators.
Well, that's one of the USDA Ag Census statistics. The fastest growing demographic amongst farm management is young women. And these are young women that are tech savvy, that they have a lot of experience in education, and they're going to be the ones that are going to help guide us through this technology transition that's underway in agriculture. They're much more technology savvy than their parents. They're open to new technology and new thinking, and it'll be a welcome addition to the world of farming.
Do you think that's part recruiting, or just sort of the natural flow of women in tech, and the growing trend of college degreed women, just going up and up and up?
I think it's probably that. I think the other thing is that there's so much more viticulture and agronomic technology and study that's available, that it's just opened up the marketplace in terms of the people that are interested in those kinds of things.
Okay. All right. Getting back to this kind of boots on the ground thing, it seems relevant to me, but uh, what what role would you say that preventative maintenance plays in irrigation security?
I think it's a critical role, is that simple things like the flushing out of drip lines has a lot to do with distribution uniformity, pressure uniformity, how many times the filter station might be backwashing, overall pumping efficiency. So that's one of the things. The other thing is a pump efficiency test. An annual pump efficiency test is an excellent predictor of mid-season pump failures, which many times can be catastrophic for pump health. So preventative maintenance is important. If you consider these assets might be multi-$100,000, multi-million-dollar well development systems. And if that is not maintained correctly, it's going to cost in terms of obviously irrigation efficiency, energy. If you're injecting nutrition, injecting fertilizers into the water, that's going to be affected as well. And of course, the big one is crop health.
Okay, and then I guess on this issue of preventative maintenance, you and I have talked about it a little bit, and I was also even listening to one of the kind of first shows I've listened to since we started working together on ag tech, and listening to a startup founder, and this was on the Ag Tech So What podcast. And I even heard this guy, let's see, he's a co-founder at Kilimo. I might be saying that wrong. He's the CEO and co-founder. And I even heard him saying that, talking about this sort of maintenance issue and the need to partner, with other vendors to make that happen. And I guess you pointed out to me in recent days that there's just kind of a big gap between, which is, we talk a lot about the gap and the boots on the ground, but a big gap between all the things that are being sold, what actually happens out in the field when things start to break or just don't work as expected, and how they get maintained. how do you see, and how does North Coast Water Association see kind of filling that gap to make sure that these preventative maintenance measures actually take place and benefit operators?
Well, in terms of technology, some of the preventative maintenance that's baked into that is there's a certain amount of maintenance that goes along with the soil moisture sensor and might have to be replaced a couple times a year. Certainly, with all the different sensors in springtime, when you're bringing up the system for the first time, there's a certain amount of maintenance and repair that would be needed there. Um, and Yeah, and as the farm evolves in terms of technology, that maintenance and repair burden is only going to grow. Um, I think one of the lasting memories I have about pump maintenance is a story that a gentleman shared with me. I asked if a particular organization had a pump efficiency testing program, and he said to me, "No, this organization will never give me budget dollars for pump efficiency testing or any sort of preventive maintenance, but I can always get emergency dollars for a pump failure." He says, "Sure, I don't want the pump to fail during the growing season, but that's the kind of the limitations that we have to work within here, where the company's just not aware and educated and committed to preventative maintenance and what that can do."
And how do we fix that type of dilemma?
Well, I think it's a different conversation. I think it's a conversation with directors and at the C-suite where if you look at a large farming operation, how much money was spent on pump repair, how much money was spent on these different, electrical problems, water-related problems, and can that year's worth of expenditure be better deployed in a preventative fashion? And in most cases, it can.
And is there like kind of some retraining, or is it really just a different way of thinking for them? Or I'm sorry, new training, or is it just a different way of those folks thinking about the problem?
It's both. It's a different way of thinking about the problem. Obviously, is that they have to become aware or made aware of what it's costing them to not look at it, and then it's training. Right? There's certain things that you don't do during the winter. There's certain things that you do during the spring, and these are all have an impact on how much money you're spending on energy, how efficient your pumping is, and again, predictors of whether a pump failure is in the future.
Okay, and then speaking of spending on energy, maybe this feels like it could be a tip waiting to happen for some of the operators. But how does how has PG&E's power quality affected irrigation security, and what solutions have you seen implemented, or maybe even helped implement yourself?
Excellent question. So when we talk about power quality, what we're talking about is the voltage that we're getting from the power company. And in the case of a three-phase electrical system, the phase imbalance, the voltage imbalance between the three phases. These voltages can go high, they can go low, and as they go high and low, it puts different stresses on a pump. In some cases, those extremes can damage a pump in short order. In some cases, they can damage a pump over time. PG&E and all the utility companies, they have a published statement about the quality of power that they're going to deliver at the meter. And the mechanisms that govern the utility companies are such that those standards for power can be held to account. It's hard in agriculture. We tend to be at the end of the line where regulating power is difficult. But the power companies can replace transformers, they can add capacitor banks, they can fix problems once they're made aware of it. In fact, I had one situation where a guy that farms pistachios said to me, he said, Val, I've got 100 pumps. And at any given time, 10 of those pumps are down. And he says, I have no predictability. He said, I want to have technology to monitor the pumps where I can focus on my least efficient pumps to better target my maintenance dollars, and I can improve efficiency and predictability over time. So we've got a telemetry system installed on the pump, and right off the bat, we saw that the electricity on the voltage on the three-phase system was wildly out of balance to the point where we needed to do an emergency stop, shut the pump off, and make the power company aware. And we had the data. We were able to make the power company aware through a certain amount of arm twisting. They finally came out and replaced the transformer and added a capacitor bank. It turns out at this particular pump site, there was a pump failure, a pump motor failure a month before that was directly related to the phase imbalance.
Wow. And on that same thread, can you quantify like a typical cost savings for or from proper PG&E rate plan selection? Is that an issue?
So yeah, the large commercial users, including ag, we have special classifications depending on horsepower and usage. And the rate plan we select obviously affects the time of use, the period between 4 and 8 o'clock, and the cost of our power. And there's some pretty savvy ways that you can choose to make those selections. There's some blind ways you can make that selection, which I suspect most people do. So there's a lot to it. The other thing is understanding utility billing. On your utility bill, and you'll see a demand charge. The demand charge applies every billing period. So if you are in a billing period during the winter and you don't need to use your pump, then there's no demand charge. If in the winter you accidentally turn your pump on, then there's a demand charge. Depending on horsepower, that demand charge could be $1,000. It could be a couple $1,000. Large horsepower pumping, it's not uncommon that a 250 horsepower pump will consume $15,000 to $20,000 worth of electricity during the summer months. So the numbers are significant.
Wow. So it sounds like there are a lot of things that make it depend how that all looks, and complications that can arise as well.
Certainly a lot of that. The other thing is up here in the wine country, typically the pumps are a lot lower horsepower. Um, and a lot less power consumption, but they usually have complication such as a co-use for domestic tanks, reservoirs. So the amount of water moving around and the potential for wasted energy is quite high.
Okay. We've talked about this next question a little bit, but I think it might be valuable to viewers and listeners for this conversation. But what, in your mind, is the ideal operation size where farms are savvy enough with tech to be competitive and kind of address a lot of these issues with some of the available technology?
That's a great question. That's a great question. First of all, let me address the second part, which is be savvy with tech. Um, in my experience across the Western United States, a lot of different crop types, a lot of different large vertically integrated farming operations. It's surprising the variance in how prepared some of these organizations are for technology. Some of them are woefully unprepared, and some of them are killing it with technology to the point where they've got a competitive advantage. It's gotten to the point where I believe that technology is a competitive imperative. You better get on board or it's going to be too late. Along with that technology, the ones that are successful with technologies are the ones that recognize that they need to have the ability to do some repair, configuration, ingest the data, manipulate the data to get the most out of it. I think, does that answer the question?
Yeah, partly, yeah, and then also just to the point of what's kind of the sweet spot
Yeah.
operation size?
Well, that's it. It's a hard question to answer. In my experience, it's probably between 400 and 600 acres where the farm tends to be owner operated. They tend to be tech savvy and have a much more do-it-yourselfer, children, family members involved, where they're tackling that data ingestion in ways that other organizations can't.
Okay. And this is just kind of for my own visualization, but and because I can relate to vineyards a little bit, well, more than I can other types of farm operations. But does that go beyond the boutique vineyard, or can that size kind of span what I might call the boutique vineyard?
I would think for the boutique vineyard, it's probably a lot less than that,
Okay.
four to
Okay.
600 acres. That 4 to 600 acres is typically going to be orchard crops and that type of thing.
Okay.
An example of that is in the Sacramento River Delta, there's the chill accumulation is such that there's this one area of apples and cherries, and a lot of the historical farmers there are getting old and selling their land, and there's young and upcoming farmers out there that are farming that ground and collecting acreage, and again, a sweet spot around 600 acres.
Okay. Great.
Tech savvy,
Yeah.
progressive.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, and then in the area of kind of training and knowledge transfer, speaking of the young folks coming in, but how do you see farms training like irrigators and ranch managers to address some of the technical issues that we're talking about, and then even the ones we haven't touched on yet?
I think that's a great question. There tends to be a dim view of what the irrigators are capable of. Um, and so my answer to that dim view is let me have a chance. Let me have a chance to have a conversation with them. And I think it's important to point out that with any technology, especially automation, human nature's reaction to that is to be threatened by it. And irrigators and you and I are no different.
Right.
So the first conversation with the irrigators has to be in their native language, Spanish, and it has to be somewhat inspirational. To the irrigator, I say, technology is changing farming, and this gives you the ability to be more valuable to your employer, to be more valuable in the marketplace. The other thing is I like to tell stories of when I was farming, we had an irrigator, Saul, who was 73 years old, had a flip phone and an old beat up leather, holster on his belt. And he knew more about the irrigation system than all of us combined. He had been with the family over 40 years, by far most experienced, most valuable irrigator employee, irrigation manager. And so we had a block that we put in full automation, pump and valve control, weather station, soil moisture sensors, quite advanced. And to do the training, we knew that we needed to do it in Spanish. We do it on a Friday afternoon. We put out lunch. And on the side, we were kind of taking bets because we thought Saul was going to have a hard time with this. He's going to push back. He's not going to want any part of this. And so I called, we did the training. Training was successful. Monday morning, I called the guy that do the training. I said, "Hey, did you happen to hear from Saul over the weekend?" He's all, "I sure did. He went and bought a smartphone. He called me 5 times." Holy smokes, the guy's engaged. Within a week, he's a power user, and he's given the young guys a hard time about not getting on board with technology. And so that was just a very gratifying to be part of that. And then we were able to take it a step further, is that, the reality is these guys, they're fixing their own cars, they're wiring stereos, they're capable. And so what we did is all our documentation, or we developed documentation on how to wire up the controllers and pressure transducers and valve solenoids. And we put together diagrams and Spanish with color codes, and we laminated them. And within a couple weeks, we've got these guys doing all the installs and maintenance. They had gone to the last tree on the row near the road, and they painted a big number 1, 10 trees over a big number 2, another 10 trees, a big number 3. So what they were doing is they were identifying the rows where the valves were, and they were speeding to valve drip line pressure related problem in a matter of minutes or hours versus days, weeks, or worse, not even knowing at all. Um, So during that phase, when we were doing that automation, again, we were not automating to get rid of labor. We were automating to make labor more productive, give us more levers to pull in response to labor, water, climate. And over an 18-month period, as we were automating, the acreage that an irrigation crew and a ranch manager could manage doubled over that 18 months. Um, where we had savings in labor and time, what we did is our irrigators, we'd equip them with loppers, so light pruning during the fall and the winter they would do, which lowered our contract labor bill, and so just win-win-win overall.
Does that filling the gap thing for out of curiosity, for the time savings that you just mentioned, where you got the guys with loppers going out there and doing some occasional pruning and stuff, is that something that concerns both the field labor force and the I guess the managers of the operations? They're like, well, what are you going to do with all these guys, or do they, are the guys going, what am I going to do with all with all the time I saved them?
Well, the field labor contractors are a come and go labor force, so that is on demand.
Hmm.
Our irrigation and irrigation leads were year-round employees that we never furloughed, even in the winter when we didn't need them. It is too critical to do that. So obviously, they were felt threatened by automation. They asked that question, what's that going to do to my job? And of course, getting them loppers and having them involved in the training, the installation, the maintenance made them understand that, hey, we're not getting rid of you guys. We're just, again, we're being sincere to more levers to pull, better utilization of our resources, again, in response to labor, water, climate.
So is it true that you're both kind of expanding some of their field expertise, hands-on field expertise, as well as leveraging stuff that they already know, and help?
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. Is that we did a tailgate training where we were showing them how to adjust a pressure compensating valve. And one of the irrigators says to the guy leading the training, I don't speak Spanish, but he said something along the lines, well, why is this important? And the trainer said, well, because of distribution uniformity. And so if you've got irrigators thinking and speaking in terms of distribution uniformity, all of a sudden that's a pretty advanced irrigator. I can teach him to be checking for blight and other things going on in the orchard or the vineyard. So um, what we did is we also, that ag rate selection, now that we had all the telemetry on the pump that showed use and use patterns, we were able to take that and train the ranch manager how to do the ag rate selection himself rather than a layer up and management having to do that. So we push more and more of the decision making in the operation, the compliance reporting of the block down into the hands of the ranch manager and the irrigation team. Um,
That sounds
we
win-win.
we had them all equipped with tablets. In fact, I think that's an important question that I always ask is I'll ask, someone that's considering technology, I'll say, have you considered or have you ever gotten tablets for your irrigators? And the answer is usually, oh no, they'll lose them, they'll steal them. And that's small-mindedness. When we had I think we probably had 10 or 12. Yeah, one would get run over, one would go missing a year, but the cost of that was trivial compared to the benefit that we were getting out of that.
Yeah, I've worked in large operations, or large enough operations, where they have equipment like that out in the field. In this case, it was like 99 maybe, when they were putting these IBM ThinkPads out in the field, because they were pretty rugged at the time. And yeah, sometimes, well, they'd come back for repair, and sometimes they'd come back completely destroyed, and you're trying to imagine what happened to it. But it's kind of the cost
Yeah,
of.
it's a small problem. I think there's a piece of data that is so critical to the irrigators, and that's drip line pressure. In
Sure.
fact, I tell ranch managers and middle managers, hey, if you're going to log on and look at a graph of drip line pressure, you're wasting your time. There's drip line pressure problems in every vineyard, every orchard in the world. The best thing to do with the graph is to put it in the hands of the irrigator, enable him to go do something about it, and they will.
Yeah, cool. And you mentioned the tailgate training. Is that one of the ways that we spread the word about all of this, and are there other methods by which you spread the word about all of these issues and the potential for addressing them?
Um, Yeah, I think tailgate meetings on a specific to a vineyard, specific to a site are always better, especially if I have information in advance, like a schematic to the system, the block layout, soil map, all that kind of thing. I'll use as an opportunity to work with the irrigation crew and also working with them. What I'm looking for is to an assessment of how well can they and the organization ingest data.
Okay. And you've touched on this, or we've touched on this, I suppose, in somewhat indirect manners, but maybe there are some other things you'd like to mention to this question, or to maybe elaborate on a little further. But how do you and North Coast Water Association help farm operators with this problem of irrigation security?
Um, First and foremost, a pump efficiency test, right? Flow meter calibration, groundwater levels. What's the state, the health of the pumping system? The other part of that is what is the ability to deploy water? And most importantly, is the deployment of that water reconciled back to agronomic intent? I intended to put on X gallons per vine. Did I in fact do that? Was that even close? Was it off? So the reconciling of actual flow to plan is something that a lot of people don't do. They don't do it because it's hard. There's a lot of mathematics that are in there that need to be done, and most people irrigate to 6.5 hours. This time of year, 7.5 a day, maybe 9. Right? We got a heat wave coming up. We'll try to go 10. You can be a lot more precise, a lot more scientific than that, and the threats of labor, water, and climate kind of demand that you do so.
I heard that on a podcast this week that in some cases, um, irrigators or farmers will kind of just watch to see if the neighboring farm is irrigating at this time. So that'll be their cue that they need to irrigate. So less than sophisticated.
Well, here's the story is that when I worked in Salinas and a lot of the vegetable farmers down there, they might have a ranch on either side of the valley, and it's a 40-minute drive across. So the irrigator turns on the water at one, and then he's going to go over to the other one. Along the way, he stops at home to get a sandwich. He winds up taking a nap. By the time he gets back, right, it's been on 4 hours longer than it should. And so that kind of stuff happens. And right, that kind of precision or lack of precision costs money in terms of wasted energy, wasted water, wasted nutrition in the water, and of course, crop health.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about. It'll drive people who are freaked out about water insane. How do you specifically help operators integrate new monitoring technology, some of which we've sort of talked about in an ancillary way, with while maintaining traditional expertise?
Um, The first one is what I call compliance in agronomics. I have a solution for monitoring the flow meter. Most people have motivation to do that for compliance reasons.
Okay.
Well, as long as we're going to monitor the flow meter, let me help get the data back to the viticulturist so they can see how they're doing to plant. The other thing is along the way, we've got a controller there. Let's get some other data. Let's get discharge pressure, maybe post-filter pressures. What are the things that are nearby and convenient? My next monitoring product is what I call a pump efficiency product, where it's more robust, where we're monitoring flow, pressure, water level, and also the power on the customer side of the meter. So we're going to monitor the power for one is the health of the power, the quality of the power I'm getting from the power company, what they say it is, and two, how is my pump using that power? And is it being done so in a way that's safe? And then I can also take all those different parameters, flow, pressure, water level, and power, and do an emergency stop of the pump if necessary.
Okay. You and I touched on this next question last week, I guess. I keep saying this week, but last week. But I think it would be a cool thing to touch on here. What are specific business opportunities that you see for young people in ag and veterans in ag? Both, and when I say veterans too, I think both the people that have been around for a while, but also those who've been in armed forces who are in ag or thinking about getting into ag.
That's a great question. Again, the missing boots on the ground. Irrigation technology is kind of a marriage of traditional IT, traditional information technology, computers, routers, wires, a combination of IT and irrigation. So it kind of brings up the rhetorical question, is your IT person going to wear irrigation boots? And the answer is no, they're not. It's a new employee, it's a different type of employee. It's that tech savvy, agronomic savvy young woman that we talked about in those demographics. It's the young men that are involved in farming that are tech savvy as well. The other thing is that the boots on the ground imperative is going to create opportunities for service organizations and local marketplaces across America. Crop specific, certain ecosystem of vendors in the marketplace. Traditionally, a lot of the ranks of contractors, building contractors, home re-additions, bathroom remodels, roofers, gutters, electricians, a lot of these companies are filled by the ranks of former veterans. And so when you consider ag technology and the boots on the ground, the missing boots on the ground, the repairing, calibration, servicing of ag technology, it's a small specialty contracting business problem. And so I think that fits well with vets. There's a low barrier to entry. It's less expensive to start an ag tech service company than it is to be a home remodeler or a constructor.
Hmm. That's interesting. Um, okay, so in wrapping up here, you mentioned this to me last week, and maybe we can you can elaborate on it a little bit more even than you did for me. But what are the yield and quality benefits of getting irrigation right?
That's a good question. And everybody in ag tech is loath to make promises about yield and quality. I would say this is that plants drink. Everything a plant does is through water. All its nutrition, everything it does is through water. So getting your irrigation right is super, super important. Being able to control sugars in wine grapes and canopy development, all of that is related to water. Disease pressure is a function of how well you're getting your water right. If you're not getting your water right, the plant is going to be more susceptible to disease and other problems. So uh, it's really important. One of the things when I was farming nuts, alternate bearing, and we were able to smooth out the alternate bearing nature down to an unheard of 5 to 10%, all through irrigation and post-harvest nutrition. The university guys were doing backflips. They couldn't believe we got it down like that. Um, and so that's just kind of scratching the surface. I think we were in that particular block and the follow-on blocks, we were getting yield improvements of 20 to 30%. Again, it's site specific, it's variety specific, and also, hey, I really don't know how someone's irrigating today. Today, they might be getting it right. They might be pretty far off. One of the things that technology and site assessment will give you is knowing that, hey, we've struggled in that block for years to do A grade fruit, and there could be some underlying reasons that's true that might be opaque to the agronomist, the viticulturist.
Yeah, that's interesting. Something that just popped in my mind that I heard last week is, and as you know, I'm new to this space, so hearing a lot of things for the first time, but that I'm curious to know if it's still this way, or if it's something that's waning a little bit. I suspect it's still this way, but that the Silicon Valley has been enamored with ag tech, and they find it to be, super sexy, which leads me to believe there's a lot of venture capitalists that have put money into it, whether that's still happening right now, but there are a lot of venture capitalists that have been putting money into it. But it seems, well, A, is that still true? And B, has anything really happened to help sort of fill the gaps that we've been talking about between the lust for that was going on or is still going on and what, some of the realities are?
No, it's fun. You bring up you bring up a good thing. There is, the ag tech investment was all the thing. That was all the rage. Everybody was pouring millions and millions of dollars to that. If you think about it, there really hasn't been any breakout stars. Most of these startup operations, they flame out because of the boots on the ground. They don't understand the complexity. The reality of ag tech, it's really not a technology problem. There's plenty of industries where we can borrow technology. It's whether you can make it harden, whether you can service it, whether you can make the data ingestible in the day-to-day farming operations so they'll keep you around. Um, I heard a conversation at one of those ag tech investment summit where the traditional ag tech investors are asking the rhetorical question, hey, there's really been no home runs. There's been no big exits from our investments. Would we be better off identifying entrepreneurs in the local marketplace and loaning them the capital they need to get a business off the ground? Again, back to the vets, back to the young people. I would do that, bet on a veteran or bet on young people that, right, have a pickup truck and the ability to put things together and the relationships in the community. I'd bet on them before I invested in any stock.
Yeah. It sounds really complicated from the sort of technology view up here that Silicon Valley might take because of all these things, the boots on the ground, the maintenance and all that. And I've even heard one particular startup founder talk about that and how they've been trying to address some of that and what a challenge it's still been, for them.
I
So,
I was on a call with a new startup company, pump and valve control, and I asked the question, well, what do you do when it breaks? The guy said to me, well, it never breaks. And then he caught himself and he said, well, what we can do is we can overnight a UPS package to the irrigators. Like, no, that's not going to work.
you're right. You have to have hands
So
on
I,
how
I
to.
I think the other thing with that ag tech investment is that what drove a lot of that is in many ways agriculture is the last non-digital frontier.
Mhm.
And so there's a lot of numbers out there about, hey, farmers have got to feed the world by this date, and that there was going to be this explosion of technology and increases in yield and all that. And it really hasn't materialized. And so, right, it's site specific. It's the ecosystem of collaboration. What's the pump company? Who's the irrigation company? Who's the crop consultant? Who's taking care of the farmer? And whoever you are in ag tech, you better plan on fitting into that ecosystem. Otherwise, they'll run you off.
Right. I want to ask or wrap up with, asking what our call to action is to viewers, but I guess I should first ask, how did we do? Did we miss anything important? We need to talk any more about climate or anything?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think the key takeaway is that people need to understand is that no matter what it is, if it's out there in the farm, if it's out there in the vineyard, it's going to break. And when it does, who's going to fix it? Irrigation farming is a right now business. If the farmer calls you, Mr. Ag Tech Silicon Valley guy, and you say, maybe next week I'll get out there, not good enough. He's going to hang up. He's going to call someone else. He's going to keep calling until he gets help. On his cell phone is the tractor repair guy, the pump technician. I want to be the guy on the cell phone. And so I think the call to action is for those that are interested in irrigation security is let's have a conversation, schedule a call. Ideally, I like to come out and do a site visit and and see what kind of problems you're having and what kind of solutions are potential.
Great. And I guess the fastest path to that is to go to northcoastwaterassociation.com and line up a call with you, right?
Yeah, on my website, northcoastwaterassociation.com, there's several places where you can actually book a no obligation 30-minute call.
Right. That sounds great. Cool. Well, Val, this has been very educational. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to ask you all this stuff, a lot of which I'm learning about as we go. And yeah, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Roberto. This has been great. I love talking about irrigation, so good.
That wraps up our first video for the North Coast Water Association channel. I want to thank Val King for sharing such detailed insights into irrigation security and the future opportunities in water management and ag tech. If you found this conversation valuable, make sure to hit subscribe. We've got more great content coming your way. You can learn more about North Coast Water Association's work at northcoastwaterassociation.com. I'm Roberto Hernandez. Thanks for joining us for this inaugural episode. See you in the next one.